This video is in response to the question, has anything particularly helped you or made things worse along the way? And there's loads of things that I could name here, but I've limited myself to 3 of each, and there will be bits that fit into this that come up in response to other questions as well. So, number 1 on my things I've found helpful is books and reading. So when I'm really struggling, I actually find that I stop reading I stop reading new things because I can't focus and I just lose concentration so quickly. But because I used to read a lot before I had my breakdown, it's like I had this whole reference library of experiences and other people's experiences that I could use when I didn't have my own words. I could just find theirs, and it gave me a way in sometimes to talking about things, and I would go back and read the same things over and over again, like the same poems over and over again, or the same children's books a lot of the time, and it was just really soothing, and like I knew where it was going because I'd read it before, and it was like following a pattern that I knew really well. And I found that really comforting. And also because there's so much literature about being really frustrated with not being able to say exactly what you mean, and I relate to that a lot in terms of therapy. I just found therapy intensely frustrating a huge amount of the time, and I found it so impossible to describe my experience that it was just really reassuring to know that other people who, like, their job was words, it was their life's work, and they also found it that difficult and that frustrating to try and say what they really meant. The second thing that I found really helpful is social media, which gets a really bad rep in terms of young people's mental health. Every so often there's an article in the paper that says, oh, social media is doing terrible things to young people. But actually, if you're someone who is horrendously socially awkward in real life, then social media is a really great way of connecting with people. And when I was in hospital last time, I spent a lot of time on Twitter, and like, there are some nasty corners of Twitter, but actually there's a really large supportive mental health community online. And I wasn't really up to seeing people face to face, and I would have been very isolated, like a lot of my friends from before I had my breakdown. I wouldn't necessarily know how to explain things to them because they wouldn't necessarily have had experiences they could relate to, whereas with like other mental people that I chatted to on Twitter, we could actually have a laugh about some of the more absurd things that happen when you're in a mental health hospital. And it was actually really validating, and I couldn't really focus for longer than about 140 characters because I can't when I'm that unwell. So it really actually was a really helpful tool for stopping me falling into too much isolation. And the last thing that I want to say that I found really helpful is I've got 2 cats, so I'm going to try and show you. So they're both asleep at the moment, but I'll explain why they've been really helpful, and then I'll try and get them on camera. But partly I just love them a lot, but also they're kind of a way of monitoring how I'm feeling. Like, if I'm feeling like I'm good for them, they're good for me, we've got this covered, then I can kind of tell that things are okay. Whereas if I'm finding myself thinking, oh, I'm not really very good for them and they'd be better off without me, and actually the things that they get from me they could get from anyone, so yeah, they'd just be better off if I wasn't here and I left them with someone else, then I know that that's a point where things are getting quite unsafe. So my cats are called Emmy and Krista. So this is Emmy, and Puss. She is not impressed. Emmy. So on to the things that have made things worse along the way. Number 1 is funding issues, which everybody knows about, but specifically, I think the way that the messages are sent to service users about funding issues is really problematic and makes things a lot more painful. So I used to have a day centre that I went to that had its funding cut by half, and the message we were given was, this service is changing and there are financial problems, but actually it's mostly about creating services which are recovery focused and which are not encouraging dependency, which I think is a really, really blaming word, because everyone depends on something. Nobody wants to be depending on mental health services. We would all like to be out there living our independent lives. Well, independence is a myth, but we would all like to be out there rather than in services. And I think it's like victim blaming. Like, it's telling us that if services can't meet our needs, then that's because our needs are wrong rather than because the resources aren't there. And I think that makes it so much more damaging than it needs to be. And if they had just said to us, we would love to run your services, that has been run, but our funding's been cut and we can't, and we're sorry, then I would have been able to handle that. But I couldn't handle the message that I was sent about it. The second thing is the way that, particularly when I first came into services, the way that people engaged with my family. So I was relatively young when I had my breakdown. I was 22, and I think that because I was young and I lived with my family, people automatically assumed that I wanted them completely involved. And when I found the way that they acted unhelpful, I was often told that they would respond in a more helpful way if I communicated better with them. And there was a lot of eagerness to get them in for meetings and to tell them everything about me and my risk level and how things were with me. And actually, I love my family to bits, but what I desperately needed was space from them and space to myself, and to feel like there was someone who was there just for me. And I kind of ended up feeling like the people who were supposed to be taking care of me actually were taking care of my family's feelings first. And that was really difficult and made it a lot harder to engage with the services that I kind of needed. And the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of things which have made things worse is austerity, basically, and specifically things like welfare benefit cuts and benefits assessments. And because I think that the process of assessment for personal independence payments, which is like disability benefits, it forces you to fit your problems into somebody else's boxes in a way that's really hard. And for me, one of my big anxieties is that I tend to tell myself that my problems aren't really real, and that it's like imposter syndrome. Like, I've just made all this up in my head, and actually if I just tried a little bit harder, then probably I'd be fine. And if I can do one thing, then why can't I do these other things? And the way that the assessment process for benefits is set up, it precisely mirrors those insecurities. So it's been quite a big trigger for crises for me and for quite a few people that I know.